We're seeing as many as numbers as high as about 50%. More and more kids are being identified as having difficulties with their mental health. When we initially got started, we were really servicing IEP population. That accounts for about 14% of the student population across the country. Schools are federally mandated to provide these services to these children, and oftentimes they cannot find the providers. So it's a real problem, and a lot of these schools don't know how to address it. Pediatricians don't know how to address it. Outpatient facilities are overrun. We hear wait lists as long as 24 months. So, really, we exist to try and shorten that time period, get kids in to see a provider faster in a space where they're already comfortable, oftentimes either in the school or in the home.
Awesome. I'm live with Rachel Mack Robinson, founder and president of DotCom Therapy. It's awesome to have you here today, Rachel.
Excited to be here.
Yes, excited to get into it. Mental health care is evolving. It's continuing to evolve with the landscape of telemedicine and telehealth, and that's been especially pressing for parents and kids. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Maybe for those out there that don't know what dot-com therapy is, you could start with a quick introduction on yourself and the company. And then from there, I would love to get into the founding story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my background's as a speech language pathologist and founded the company back in 2015, specifically to address speech therapy in kids age 0 up to 21. Since 2015, we've expanded beyond speech therapy into offering services in speech, occupational therapy, and mental health. We deliver those services primarily into school districts, but we also have the capacity to deliver services into the home.
Awesome. And I'm going to pull up my notes in order to kind of make the conversation a little fun. What did your parents and grandparents do for work?
Oh boy, yes. So I have actually a third generation entrepreneur, which I lovingly say is the reason why I went into speech pathology, because that was not the direction that I ever intended to go into. I know how hard it is to be an entrepreneur and to build your own company. My grandfather has a really interesting background, Henry Duda. So he was one of the first individuals to actually co-op the milk delivery system out in Chicago. And then he was an avid camper and loved Airstream trailers and would tinker in his basement. And he actually invented the awnings that you see on Airstream trailers even today. If you look on the side, it says Zip D, and that was his product. So he was really kind of the one that paved the way. Then my parents both owned their own companies. My father was owned an advertising agency, and my mother was a children's clothing designer. So I was definitely raised in kind of a unique upbringing, where from a young age I was told you don't complain about something without having a solution. So it was, if there was a problem, well, how would you make it better? How would you fix it? How would you improve it? And it kind of led me into adulthood to ask those same questions in my career, and solve for a solution.
But you didn't set out to be an entrepreneur, right? Like because you saw your grandparents and parents, I think you mentioned that you were wanted to steer clear of that.
Absolutely. I was like, I'm going straight to the medical field. It's safe, it's predictable, and happily joined on to become a speech pathologist. Yeah.
And then at what point did you decide that, you know, you actually had the bug, but were not maybe being honest with yourself? Or what problems did you see in the market that pushed you to go that direction? If I recall, in the very early days of dot-com therapy, you were also doing a lot of traveling to and from Alaska.
Correct. So when I originally got out of school, I worked in a lot of different environments delivering speech therapy. And no matter what environment I worked in, access was a huge issue. Whether it was myself spending too much time behind the wheel of my car to meet my patients, or vice versa, my patients spending too much time in their car to reach me, I knew there had to be a better way. And so back in 2015, ended up calling all across the US to try and figure out if there was anyone that would do a teletherapy pilot with us. And the only school that said, yes, we'll try this was located in Bethel, Alaska. And to kind of lower the scariness of entering into teletherapy, they wanted to do a hybrid approach first. So for the first year of DotCom Therapy, I would actually fly up to Bethel, Alaska, get on little remote bush planes, fly out to villages out there, work with my students face to face. And then I was able to carry out the remainder of my services all through tele. So it's definitely a boots on the ground approach.
So you travel back and forth in order to do this hybrid model. And then when did it like how did that evolve and then become what .com therapy is today?
It was really a grassroots movement. Once we started with that one school, other schools started catching wind on how successful it was. And so we didn't even have a proper sales team at the beginning of .com. It was literally introductions made from directors of special education saying, "You guys helped us out here. Do you mind helping our neighboring school district?" So it grew really organically from that initial partnership with LKSD. And fast forward to today, and we're in about 174 school districts. So it's definitely evolved. Um, and if you look at kind of the overall impact of where we are now, we have about 1.6 million kids under our care.
Mm. Yeah, that's helpful to hear about the sort of number there. Could you give us a little bit more of the lay of the land in terms of why a service like .com therapy is needed today? Sort of what's the state of mental health care in the would you say pediatric space?
Yeah, so a definite differentiator between us is we are really focused on pediatric and adolescent. So there has been some huge, innovation and landscape shifts when it comes to adult mental health care, but there hasn't been a lot when it comes to the pediatric space. When we initially got started, we were really servicing the IEP population. So when I say IEP population, that's children that are on an individualized education plan. That accounts for about 14% of the student population across the country. Schools are federally mandated to provide these services to these children, and oftentimes they cannot find the providers to service those kids. So we come in and we partner with them to be able to fill those positions. What we've found since, especially post COVID, is that more and more kids are being identified as having difficulties with their mental health care, and what we kind of consider the general population. So kids that aren't already included in those IEP services, that 14%. We're seeing as many as numbers as high as about 50% of student populations are stating that they're either feeling certain symptoms of depression or anxiety. So it's a real problem, and a lot of these schools don't know how to address it. Pediatricians don't know how to address it. Outpatient facilities are overrun. We hear wait lists as long as 24 months to get in. So really, we exist to try and shorten that time period, get kids in to see a provider faster, and to get them to see a provider in a space where they're already comfortable, oftentimes either in the school or in the home.
Mm. Um, Very interesting. And then, what kind of things are kids dealing with these days? And how has that evolved maybe since you and I were kids?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I think in so many different ways. Um, I think one, thing that we have to acknowledge is the glaring impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, for individuals like you and I, that was a blip on the map of our lifetimes. It was a weird thing to live through, but it didn't really encompass a huge portion of our lives. For kids, they haven't been, their history isn't as long as ours. So if you think of it from a percentage of time in their life, it's a really large percentage of their life that they were in lockdown in the pandemic. Additional changes also are, think about violence that's happening within school districts. Shooting drills. That's not something I ever remember having to go through as a child. I remember tornado drills and fire drills, but I definitely don't remember that. And so that added component of anxiety over them is really difficult. Um, Colleges are more aggressive. They're more difficult to get into. The expectations are higher. We also have a social structure that surrounds social media. Um, so if you think about it, the social aspect of all of these children, it's following them home. It's ever consuming. There's no way for them to kind of just take a break and check out.
Got it. And then on the therapy modality side, how does treating children and adolescents sort of differ from treating adults? And then how is it the same?
Great question. I think one of the biggest challenges when it comes to working with children and how it's different than how we approach the adults is that they have a lot more stakeholders in their life. We've got to ensure that we're including the parents and the teachers in the journey, as well as supporting even something as simple as the siblings in their life. Um, Whereas with an adult, it's kind of up to you. It's the onus is on you to go to therapy and to make things better. It's very different with kids. The plus side is kids are incredibly motivated when it comes to technology. So at the end of the day, we are a remote provider, 100%. And having kind of that separation works really, really well when delivering therapy. We have found that patients appear to be more comfortable opening up to someone via this modality. And if you also think about some of the patients that we're treating in kind of smaller, remote areas, whereas with an adult, you might be able to have that separation. As a child, the individual they're speaking with is probably going to be someone close to their parent circle, so they may not feel quite as safe and secure disclosing as much information. Um, but that also makes it really exciting because, again, we're able to reach these kids in a way that they haven't been able to be reached in the past. In terms of similarities between treating kids and treating adults, I think we found that teletherapy is a successful modality in treating both of these. I would also say that the stigma is being reduced both in adulthood, in adults facing mental health challenges, and in kids facing mental health challenges. People are more open to talking about going to therapy than they were 10, 15 years ago. And we find that not just with the pediatric population, but also in the adult population.
So kids are more open to the fact that they're going to therapy. It's not something that's as stigmatized or something that they hide.
Absolutely. It's no different than saying that they're going to the gym for a lot of these kids. They talk very openly about meeting with their therapist, talking through problems, managing anxiety, managing depression. I mean, you even see it in pop culture. I mean, think about the songs that have come out. There was that one performer, Logic, came out with the suicide hotline number, which is now changed to 988. But it's interesting shift in how people are approaching mental health challenges.
And then as a parent, family, child are sort of like browsing through providers, what would you describe the experience as similar to? Is it similar to an adult that's looking for therapy where you get to see the provider's credentials and then get to basically get a high level understanding of the parts of their focus, whether it's something like ADHD or something else?
Yep, exactly. So we want to make sure that we're matching not just a therapist to a patient, but the right therapist to a patient. There's a lot of evidence out there that shows that having a high level of rapport with your provider directly influences outcomes. And so we want to make sure, again, that in adult therapy or pediatric therapy, that there is that level of rapport that remains.
And then, I'm not very familiar with the lay of the land when it comes to child sort of psychology and therapy. What kind of modalities are there? Is it like things like cognitive behavioral therapy? Do those apply across the board?
Yes, absolutely. And so we have therapists that are trained in all different types of therapy delivery modalities. And so we're able to kind of find the right one for you, depending on what you're looking for.
Got it. And then in the context of COVID and the pandemic, is there anything that you found as like particularly helpful for kids as they're sort of processing what's happened and how to best integrate those lessons and that experience into the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one that would probably be better for my director of mental health. But, um, I think it's making sure that as parents and as adults in these children's lives, that we're having an open dialogue with these kids and not just kind of charging forward. Um, we've heard a lot of mention of the word grief when it comes to talking about COVID and these kids. Grief of lost experiences. Some of these children lost loved ones that were older. Um, and so instead of just kind of resiliently putting our heads down and charging forward and saying, like, well, that was a weird chapter in the world history, we need to be able to acknowledge it and ask our children how they're feeling. And we need to be okay with the fact that there were missed experiences and we need to be comfortable dialoguing with our kids.
It sounded like, as I've dug into what .com Therapy is doing and how you've differentiated the platform, that one of the key differentiators is the fact that your company actually is W-2ing your clinicians. And I'm curious, why are other players in this mental health space not doing that? And then what kind of unique or competitive advantage does that give your company?
Yeah. So we were from the very beginning very adamant about W 2ing all of our employees versus going the 1099 route. And the reason we made that decision early on was we were not going to become the Uber of pediatric therapy. The Uber of in a 1099 by just the very nature of it is transactional in nature. You have very little control over the quality of that individual. But we wanted to be able to maintain quality. We wanted to instill confidence, and we're building relationships here. It's not a transaction. And so the only way to safely do that is to W 2 classify all of our employees. What we found on the back end of that is that we also have the ability to just offer our provider base more. We're able to provide mentorship. We're able to provide upfront training. We're doing like grand rounds where if there's a complicated case, we're able to bring our therapists all onto one call to discuss how they would approach it. And so what we're hearing from our providers is that even though we're a 100% remote company, they've never felt closer to their coworkers than they have since joining .com Therapy. And as a result, it has led us to a 97% retention rating with our providers. And why that's important is because if you are a patient consuming our services and you have a relationship with our providers, you don't want that provider to leave while you're on the verge of your therapy journey. You don't want them to be halfway through and then be like, sorry, I relocated to another place. You need to start all over with a therapist. So by us investing in our therapists, it's investing in our patients to make sure that when they, create that connection with one of our providers, that provider is going to be with them throughout the start through finish of their entire therapy journey.
Mm. And as we zoom out and look at the mental health space and you think about your experience leading .com Therapy, uh, where do you think we've come, as a society and also as like these businesses that are operating and innovating in the space? And where do we still have left to go? You know, whether it's in the child space and adolescent space or also out in terms of where every adults also have to go and where we can make more progress.
Yeah, and the way that I look at kind of the pediatric and adolescent space in terms of mental health is we're about like 7 years behind where the adult space is. So we still have quite a ways to go. Um, with kind of what we've been doing is the one-to-one therapy support. And where I think we still need to go is we need to create a scalable solution, not a one size fits all model. So some of the things that I'm really excited about that we're currently working on is how do we look past the one-to-one model? Because a child that's dealing with, chronic debilitating OCD is going to need a different level of support than a college freshman who is dealing with a little bit like a mild anxiety. Right now, in today's environment, we're treating those both the exact same way. You go and you get connected with a therapist, you see them either weekly or every other week. Well, that may not be appropriate for every single patient coming in our door. So, how do we kind of offset, still support, the individual that has mild anxiety, still support the high acuity child with OCD, but do it in a way that's on one platform and has different tiers of support, whether it's engaging in our community, parent coaching session, resources, self paced curriculums, or one to one therapy sessions. And I think there are ways that we can do it um, differently for every patient that comes in the door.
That's a really good point because as you look at the explosion of mental health services in the adult space, there's so much focused on prevention and journaling and meditative or mindfulness practices. There's group sessions that are now digital. There's like emotional fitness, which is a whole new category that's being born. But you don't really we've yet to really see that same sort of explosion happen within the child and adolescent space.
Exactly. And in the child and adolescent space, there is the component of all of the stakeholders that you need to include. So again, we can't look at it the exact same as we look at it as the adult space because you can't ask an 8-year-old, well, you can to journal and do all of those things, but you're also going to need parent involvement. You're going to need parent education. You're going to need teachers to be educated on specific diagnoses of kids that they have in their classroom in order to work with that student and make them the most successful that they can be. So it's like we can take certain elements that have been really successful in the adult space, but how do we then put a pediatric lens on them to deploy in the pediatric adolescent space?
Do you miss being a clinician?
Oh man, I get asked that question a lot. Um, there are definitely are days that I miss being a clinician. I had so many positive interactions and experiences, but I also feel incredibly lucky because I'm able to run this company and I'm able to hear all the success stories um, from our amazing clinicians and have that vantage point. And I know ultimately my impact where I sit today is so much bigger than what it would have been if I was still continuing my role as just a speech therapist.
Mm, totally. And then something that I would love to touch upon is sort of your personal experience with mental health and therapy and how that's sort of impacted your perspective as a leader. Did you see a therapist as a kid?
I sure did. And it's funny, I at the time I didn't even know that I was going to therapy. It was just my sleep doctor.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yes, I had an amazing sleep doctor. His name was Dr. Dan. Um, but I struggled with severe anxiety and insomnia as a kid. We I distinctly remember we had a family friend that passed away, and we weren't really allowed to ask questions about it. We just heard, he's asleep, he's at peace, you aren't going to see him anymore. And as a first grader, you hear they're asleep and you're not going to see them anymore. And I remember that triggered a bunch of anxiety with me, where bedtime became very scary. Yes. And I had Dr. Dan create a tape that at the time now I know it was a body scan tape to help me relax to go to sleep. So similar to how you can go now on Calm and you can download, a meditative sleep story. That's what Dr. Dan did for me, but he did it with a little cassette tape and I would put my little speaker under my pillow and I would have my little mindfulness journey starting in first grade.
Wow. How were you and were your parents involved at all when when you were seeing a therapist in your childhood years?
Yes. So they were very connected, and I'm grateful that they even recognized that this was a problem and were able to get me in to go see Dr. Dan. Yeah.
Amazing. And then how has your relationship to mental health and therapy, how has it evolved to where you're at today?
I look at it again as for me, it's no different than my physical health. So I'm constantly checking in with myself and building a business it's no joke. I think anyone that's been in the entrepreneur seat knows that you have a lot of highs and you have a lot of lows. So ever since, my first experience of going and seeing a therapist in first grade, I have had interactions with therapists my entire adult life. And again, it's just no different than checking in. If I need a tune up, then I'm going and I'm visiting with a therapist, talking things through. And once I feel like I'm back at my baseline, I'm able to get back, you know, to not seeing a therapist. So I urge everyone to just kind of don't be afraid of therapy. It's incredibly healthy to again check in with yourself, and your brain and your mental health is just as important as your physical health.
Totally, and they are so connected, um, too, um, and can kind of ebb and flow and impact one another. What kind of, practices or habits have you put sort of surrounding your, therapy, in order to make sure that you're in sort of the best or optimal mental health or mental space in order to also run and operate this company?
Yeah, so it's creating routines, I think is probably the most important thing. For me, my routines are strictly around right before bedtime and right in the morning. So mindfulness exercises before I go to bed, making sure I tuck my phone away and I don't have screen time at least a couple hours before bed. That doesn't include my Kindle. Um, and then in the morning, typically blocking off an hour of my morning to make sure I can kind of settle in and get ready for my routine, get my cup of coffee, and just kind of get in the right headspace before starting the day.
Yeah, and when we originally spoke, psychedelics came up, as part of your experience, and I'm curious where how they've had an impact on your mental health and where they fit in for you.
Yeah, so I live in Colorado. So
You guys just
psychedelics have
passed.
been we did. We just passed for psilocybin and ketamine treatment. But I have always been fascinated by psychedelics, and I'm really interested to see kind of how this industry evolves over the next 5 years. Um, Companies like Mind Bloom, I think, are doing things that are really, really interesting. And I think they have a ton of potential, specifically when it comes to treating some medication resistant disorders. I think of a lot of people that suffer even from PTSD. I've seen ketamine be transformative in some of the research I've read. So excited to kind of see how that shapes over time.
How if it's okay, can we dive a little bit deeper into, like, personal experimentation? What did you feel? What did you see? How has that had any sort of ripple impact sort of on where you're at today in terms of your consciousness, your mindfulness, anything like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I don't think that I gave the program enough. I've only done one of the Mind Bloom sessions. I'm definitely eager to give it another try. But
And
as
just
you
for
know, with
those
most
out
things,
there,
yeah,
just a quick maybe summary on Mind Bloom. It's at home ketamine assisted therapy. So you're actually using a lozenge, under the care of like a clinician, but like remotely. So it is still teletherapy, and you're taking ketamine, which is an anesthetic, but in specific doses, it is used as a psychedelic for mental health now.
correct, correct. And so they really kind of take you on a journey from you have an initial consult, and then prior to taking the lozenge, you meet with your mental health coach. You're allotted a certain amount of time for journaling after the experience. And I can't remember the amount of sessions they recommended. I would need to double check, but it's definitely more than one. I was a bad patient. Yeah.
Is that the only experience you've had to date?
It is the only
Yeah,
experience I've had to date. However, again, I endorse it. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch as more and more research comes out.
amazing. Would love to get a little bit deeper into sort of who you are, as a person, if you're open to some rapid fires
Oh, yeah,
questions.
bring it
Okay,
on.
okay. So a book that you've recommended the most, reread multiple times, or has left a lasting impact on you.
Who moved my cheese?
What is it about?
It is, and I need to see who the author is. It's a small, short little book. You could literally read it in a day. But it talks just about people that have kind of a problem solving mindset.
Mm,
So especially to managers, I recommend they read it. I like that type of thinking. If you hit a wall, how do you go through it, under it, around it, over it? Um,
I love that.
but essentially not accepting no as an answer.
Cool. Favorite product at Trader Joe's or another sort of consumer packaged good that you love and can't live without?
Oh my God, I'm embarrassed I'm even saying this, but my husband will contest. I carry a sleeve of saltines with me literally everywhere I go. It's not Trader Joe's, it's nothing fancy,
It's
but
crackers.
just simple, just saltines are my go-to.
That's
It's
funny.
so unhealthy.
A purchase under $200 that you've made in the last, 6 to 12 months that's left a lasting impact or has provided a lot of value for you.
Oh, that's a great question too. I have a coffee warmer that I'm pretty obsessed with that I got a couple months ago. That's just
Mm.
plug into the wall, and because I'm on calls all day, it keeps my coffee warm.
Is it the Ember mug?
No, I actually had the Ember mug for a while. This is a just an Amazon like $30
Oh,
mug
yeah?
warmer.
Oh,
Yeah,
so you can put any mug, so then you don't
any
have to
mug.
charge it.
Yeah,
Oh, nice. Nice.
game
I
changer.
love the Ember mug.
Yes, I've
Um,
used the Ember mug, but I think I go through
prefer
mugs so often. It's
you
easier
prefer
just to
this?
have that. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Signature dish or favorite thing to cook?
I'm a horrible cook. Um, horrible cook. But though I can make a mean box of like Velveeta mac and cheese. It's about it.
Uh,
My
w
husband's the cook.
oh, yeah? What does he
Yeah.
cook?
Oh, he cooks everything. He made like 24-hour ramen the other day where he cooked the meat for over 24 hours and did the broth from scratch and noodles from
Wow,
scratch. Yeah, I'm spoiled when it comes to cooking because he's a rock star there.
that's amazing. Um,
Yeah.
your one thing that you're grateful for today?
My company. I mean, I'm not blind to the fact that there aren't a lot of companies that survive this long and we're still having fun. So I
How
think
long have
I'm
y'all
really
been around?
grateful. It'll be 8 years in February.
Wow, amazing.
Mhm.
Congratulations. And how many folks are y'all now? Full
We are,
time?
I think, just shy of 300.
Wow, amazing.
Mhm.
Best piece of advice you've ever received?
Always believe in the best of intentions.
Mm, where'd you get that?
An old advisor years ago told me that even if the best of intentions may be coming from a place that you don't agree with, everyone, I think, has good intentions.
Mm. Uh, guilty pleasure.
Dateline.
Dateline.
Yes, Keith Morrison and Dateline. It's like my backtrack. I've always got it going.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder. I always find that interesting in terms of like things that really shut your brain off. In
Yes.
terms of whether it's TV, reality TV, things like that. Who do you look up to and why?
I look up to so many people. Um, my grandfather is someone I've never met, um, but is always on my mind, and I would kind of qualify that as someone I greatly look up to. Inspired me, obviously, to take this path, and um, yeah, my grandpa.
So cool to hear about his invention. Do you go camping?
Yeah, I do. I love camping and living in Colorado. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
you have so many amazing spots to choose from, but um,
And you
definitely on the bucket list is to get an Airstream at some point.
so you don't really use his product yet?
No, not
No,
yet.
the one that he
It's on
invented.
the goal line. Yeah.
Amazing. Favorite podcast or podcast episodes, any that have left a lasting impression on you?
Gosh, I am not a big podcaster. However, I did listen to Sarah Blakely's How I Built This,
Mm,
and I've probably now listened to it like several times. And I think it's a great testament to not giving up and believing in your product and She is such a iconic female founder. And so I think if there's any female founders listening to this, check that out. And it just will give you so much inspiration.
Mm. Yeah, it's a good one. And then the last one is the craziest or most out there thing you do to optimize your well-being.
Oh my goodness. You know what I did recently is, so can't really say I do this all the time, but I am starting to do it, was I did the cryogenic
Oh yeah, yeah. Cry like
experience.
yeah.
Yeah. That was really cool, no pun intended. But really fascinated by that whole um movement that's going on with cryogenics and all that.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I heard some like on one of these health podcasts that deliberate cold exposure increases your dopamine by 400%.
I believe it.
And that lasts throughout the day, which is the same as cocaine, but with
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah,
but
but a little
without
healthier for you.
I
Yeah.
think a little yeah, yeah, a little less
And
addictive in
illegal.
a yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um Amazing. Well, Rachel, this has been great. I'm curious whether you have one. Where can people more learn more about you and .com Therapy?
Yeah. Obviously our website, so dotcomtherapy.com. I'm also active on LinkedIn. So anyone can also find me on there.
Amazing. And then anything you'd like to leave us with, whether it's things to think about in the world of mental health, um, you know, thinking about children and sort of their mental well being. Anything else?
Yeah, I think just check on each other. I think, we're coming off of the recent news, even of, Twitch, the famous DJ who recently passed away. And it's ask people questions, strike up a dialogue, but don't feel like you have to stay in the safe place of conversations. If you're feeling something, say something, dig in, whether it's the small people in your lives or your peers. Relationships take effort. Reach out, ask the important questions, expose your own vulnerabilities. Sometimes you kind of taking the step to expose your vulnerability helps other people kind of follow in suit. So everyone's struggling to a certain degree. So be sure to kind of check on your people.
I love that, and I know I said it was going to be the end, but I'm curious because it's something I've actually been thinking about quite a bit. This idea of like deeper questions is, how and when to do it in a way where like sometimes I don't want to burden people uh with that. Sometimes people don't want to go there, so I'm curious like how and when you've decided to kind of bring those deeper questions to the table, whether it's with your team or family members, and is there any like go-tos, um, in order to kinda, like, break that ice.
So I will do another plug for there is a TED talk from a woman named, I think it's Celeste Harbor. I'll send you the link after this. But it's how to have a better conversation. Um, and the reality is not everyone is going to be comfortable kind of taking down those walls, but I found kind of tap into your own gut instincts on things. Are you in a safe place where there aren't people around you that could overhear? Is it an intimate conversation to begin with? Um, Ask open-ended questions. So instead of saying, are you feeling down? Are you feeling sad? How are you feeling? This time of year can be tough for some people. Keep it open ended. And then see if they're leaning in. You can give them some feedback about how you're feeling and see if they reciprocate. But the reality is, not everyone will want to open up. But I think the simple ask of how are you doing and I care about you goes a long way.
Yeah, I recently did this, experience that was pretty cool. It was like the founders of SoulCycle have a new company that's coming out. Have you seen that? The
No,
Peoplehood?
but I do love soul. I love Soul
Yeah.
Cycle. So
So
no, yeah.
they're sort of doing the emotional side of Soul Cycle without the fitness. So it's
Oh,
called
interesting.
Peoplehood, and it's like a Zoom kind of conversation with a couple people. And one of the things that they do is like the guide or the host, the moderator, who's sort of perky and like a Soul Cycle instructor will be like, "How are you doing?" as the first question, but then she'll be like, "How are you really doing?" And I like that because sometimes it's like asking the same thing just like one more time and just being like, okay, like I gave you the opportunity to be like, oh yeah, how's your day? But really like how are you doing? Like how are you doing? And I felt that was kind of cool in terms of getting a little deeper under the layer.
And even with that, when you're talking to the little people, the children in your lives, sometimes they don't have the words to be able to describe how they truly are feeling. So I would also urge you, like, find visual prompts. There's a ton of visual, emotional, schedules out there. Download it and show it to the kids. Sometimes they can just be a color. If you look at this color wheel, how are you feeling? What is the color that best represents how you're kind of feeling today? And you'd be amazed at how much kids can open up there. And you're also then training them to get in touch with their own emotions, which is pretty cool.
So cool. Okay, amazing. I'm glad we ended on that note. Um, Thank you again, Rachel, for the time. Thank you for being vulnerable and open about your own journey. And so excited about what you all are building. Excited to continue to see it grow and have an impact on the little people, the children's and adolescents in our lives, and how that then will have a ripple effect on more resilient, well-rounded uh, people all around who have those sort of tools in their toolkit.
Absolutely. Strong kiddos turn into strong adults. So,
Yes, yeah, and
yes,
then strong adults turn into strong kiddos.
exactly.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.